Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the War Report. Now, we're starting out today with a pretty big breach in U.S. Russian relations and U.S. Chinese relations. And we'll start with the Russian one because I think it's more substantial, there's more to it. So, Biden made a comment about Putin being, quote, soulless and a killer. Not my words, his words. Just for anyone out there in YouTube who want to attribute such harsh language to me, let it be known the President of the United States said those words and not me. And Putin's response was rather measured. It's what you'd expect from Vladimir Putin. He said, I wish him good health, and, I want to discuss this further. Maybe we can have a video call, maybe like a Zoom call, and discuss this further, or meet in person, etc. And the White House's retort, not even Biden's retort, is, oh, he's busy. And of course, this follows the escalation of the situation with Ukraine and in light of the Navalny stuff and his alleged poisoning and Russia's alleged poisoning of all these people, such as Skripal and all these other figures who magically survive these horrid FSB Russian intelligence poisonings. It's amazing how often those things come to light and how the Russian intelligence services are both so diabolical and so incompetent in their craft that they have these dissidents that could possibly leak state secrets or overturn the regime, overturn Putler's regime, and all of a sudden they just get off by the skin of their teeth. They escape within an inch of their lives, time and time and time again. It is truly remarkable, but bringing this to circle back, as our wonderful press secretary would say, this is a marked escalation than anything we saw during the Cold War or even during the Obama or Trump years. Now, Trump was bombastic. He made his threats. He said a lot of things. And Trump did cross a lot of lines that had not previously been crossed before. You would think North Korea, Iran, even his rhetoric on China. And his rhetoric on Russia, I wouldn't say he crossed any new lines, but it was standard. It was harsh with the occasional, like, I wish we could get along sort of rhetoric spliced in there every once in a while. But this was rather harsh, all things considered. I can't think of any point during the height of the Cold War, even between like Khrushchev and Kennedy or Brezhnev and Reagan, where the rhetoric got this fierce and this intense. And you see reactions all throughout the world because the main one that really stuck out to me is Erdogan said that Biden's comments went too far and that we should try to remain civil and diplomatic about this. I mean, when you have Erdogan condemning you for your crass language, I think you have gone too far. And I think a lot of the world is starting to realize, and we'll get into some of this stuff with the China delegation, that Biden is a senile old man who really has a very tentative grasp on reality and probably less of a tentative grasp on his administration, if there even is a grasp at all. And it's not just all Kamala working behind the scenes, which I imagine they're getting ready for. And on top of that, there was scenes of Biden boarding the airplane, walking up the stairs, stumbling 3 times before he finally falls down. Now he didn't fall down the stairs, but he was like forced to take a knee to prevent himself from falling. So, and that was walking up. And a lot of people would say it's reminiscent of one Gerald Ford, who was in office. I think Gerald Ford was in office for like 2.5 years. But point being
Yeah.
is, it's definitely not the images you want to invoke of yourself as an American president.
Yeah. I mean, in many ways, you're comparing this to the past, particularly during the Cold War era. There's no kind of diplomacy. There are no summits the way they were done then. A lot of this really is media hype. Biden is trying to take advantage very early on by appearing uniquely tough against Russia.
Yeah, and of course,
Uh,
hitting them with the they'll pay for interfering in this election, not the 2016 election, but this election, which is interesting because I was
yeah,
assured it was the most secure election in American history, and that they really fortified it. But apparently, those Russian intelligence assets that are too incompetent to carry out political hits on behalf of Putin can rig the election of the sole world superpower. So that's what we're working with here. Just to put that out there.
right, right. And so, I mean, I mean, if the Russians really hacked this election all that bad, I mean, they still didn't compromise the most secure election in election history. I mean, I think at this point, uh, the CIA and the rest of the alphabet city agencies are going to say just about anything to have an excuse to sanction Russia. I mean, nothing is going to come of it. Russia expects more sanctions. It's not a surprise, and but the comment itself is, I think, it is very unprecedented. We complained about Trump's buffoonery, uh, and this is an equal measure buffoonery. But of course, it's not that guy being a buffoon; it's somebody else. So, is it buffoonery after all? Um, I think we're going to find out that Biden and whoever follows after him will have learned a lot about what a 21st century president should be like, for for good or for ill. So, Biden, in very much the same way that the summit went in Alaska between the U.S. and China, um, they're playing their audience at home, right? Um, Prior, what you would do is you would have an agenda, right? And you would exchange pleasantries. Blinken didn't even say, "Hi, how are you? How's your day?"
Yeah, and keep in mind, during
Instead,
the height of the Cold War, Nixon, when he was vice president, had like an open and frank debate with Khrushchev. I believe that one actually was in Moscow, so that was one of the few cases where one of them actually went to the other country. But Biden's administration turned down somewhat of a similar proposal. But point being is, even during the like 2 minutes to midnight DEFCON 2 sort of situation, you had friendly relations between the heads of state of the world superpowers than you do right now. And just to circle back to your point, circle back again. Look, we're reclaiming the term for us. Actually, never mind. I don't want to. But to bring it back to your point, this is the rhetoric of a 21st century president. This is the rhetoric of a president whose empire is in decline, who is no longer unchallenged on the world stage, who has to present an image, especially with the decreasing confidence in Europe. And that has cut both ways, where they feel the United States both being too aggressive and some parts of Europe feel it's both being too soft. And that's usually an east west divide, with a few exceptions here and there. But I do think you have a point that both Trump and Biden, I think Trump is really the key to all of this, is they have set a precedent for how 21st century leaders of the United States have to behave in this new geopolitical environment.
right. It's silly as it may seem, and as hypocritical as it may seem. Yeah, this seems to be the way. It doesn't, it is hubris and it is desperation at the same time. Um, the way the summit was conducted in Alaska in and of itself is interesting. Uh, After the first hemming and hawing about where it was going to take place, and America insisting that it had to take place in America, China agreed only if it took place in Alaska. I'm not. I don't think either party thought that that this would necessarily be a warm welcome. I think everybody understood it would be challenging, and that uh, China, I think, anticipated that maybe they would have in Biden someone more palatable.
Well, I think you're missing the one key detail to all of this. Do you know the ace
Oh yeah.
that Blinken had up his sleeve? The person that went in his retinues that could have solved all of this. Not only
Oh
was it an Asian woman, but an Asian woman with purple hair. Okay,
oh oh.
that's how you're going to win the respect of Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party and the other officials of the Chinese Politburo. Is you get one of their own, you completely westernize her, and you put it out there in a delegation with your Secretary of State. Okay, that's how you do it. Henry Kissinger would be proud of it. If you ask him right now, he's very proud of these developments. The greatest statesman of all of history would be very proud of this masterful stroke of diplomacy.
Well, I mean, yeah, you bring up a really interesting point with Kissinger because Kissinger would have an agenda, right? During this summit in Alaska, there could have been all kinds of things that could have been discussed. I mean, it could be something as mundane as territorial fishing rights. It could have been something as topical but delicate as, uh, the origin of COVID, who knew what when. I understand that China that would have been very sensitive, but it could have been worded differently, though even COVID was not even brought up. Instead, Blinken's entire approach was to inundate the Chinese with their wokeism, right? So, America's always been a kind of pseudo theocracy, anyways. That's the way it deals with its morality, and its belief has always been, whether when it was a country that purportedly believed in God to one that doesn't. It has always been theocratic, and so Blinken thought, I'm going to berate these two, with my wokeism, and demonstrate to them why they're becoming beyond the pale, and the world will see me levy my complaints before them, and they will come around, they will figure it out. It's really kind of it was hard to watch, and the Chinese, you could tell by the reactions, were stunned, and I think they didn't get the sense that this administration was going to be very different than Trump's administration. In some ways, very different. Trump's administration, um, you know, it was stupid in the same way, like in a different way, with Pompeo's thinking like they were just going to take Kim Jong Un's missiles away, right? He had some comment about tankers coming in and boxes being delivered, and they would just it was ridiculous, as if North Korea is just going to give up its nuclear arms for no reason
Yeah, as if
because
this
America.
is 2002 and it's Bush dealing with Gaddafi with American undisputed power. And
Yeah.
again, I think Gaddafi is probably the prime example that a lot of these smaller second and third world countries look at when it comes to both nuclear and missile disarmament because of what happened to him. Actually, today, as we're recording this, it is March 19th, 2021. It is the 10-year anniversary of the quote unquote uprising against Gaddafi. And just in within 5 months, actually, he was brutally executed by quote unquote moderate rebels and freedom fighters in Libya while trying to escape the country. So just let that sink in.
Interesting. Yeah. Um, so obviously, again, it's just like Biden's comments um, on TV during his interview. Blinken's summit is really just for an American audience, and in fact, you know, Blinken, in a quick interview the day before the summit, mentioned that this summit is primarily for America and America's people. So there is even the tacit admission that it's not really about global leadership. It's about, well, dare I say it, America first. So, um, of course, you're not going to hear any libs complain about this, right? That's what's hilarious. It's kind of like that. I saw a tweet a few days ago about the border situation in the U.S. with Mexico, and someone said, "Well, I mean, it looks like Biden is going to do the same thing that Trump did." And another one retorted, Yes, but Biden is doing it for humanitarian reasons, not because of hate.
Well, that's lame.
And yeah, it's extremely lame, but I would expect nothing less. So, um, yeah, so this was not really a summit. Uh, Interesting that, it had to take place in nearly a third, um, sort of third party position in the same way during the Soviet era, where a Soviet dignitary would meet with an American dignitary in Iceland and Reykjavik, rather than, you know, acquiesce and show weakness by appearing in, the um, the adversary's capital.
Oh yes,
But
and
yeah, yeah, just it was just generally, a failure. But I mean, the media is kind of dealing with it as if it was a failure, or that nothing has come of it. But uh, I don't think they care. Like, I mean, Blinken didn't have an agenda. I mean, that's what's so peculiar to me, right? The only agenda there was to try to berate China and put China kind of in a weak position, and of course they refused it. You know, their last one of their last closing statements was that America has no position to talk to us from a position of authority. And there was also a kind of a remark that was recorded uh, early on after the uh, the close, where I believe one of the this yes one of the diplomats, I think it was Chen Yi Chen Yijin. He wrote, "The rise of China is a major variable in the world today. The rise of the East and the decline of the West has become a trend. Changes of the international landscape are in our favor." That's pretty bold.
yeah, some win in your sales sort of rhetoric. And frankly, looking at the current global state in the past year especially, I can understand that sort of confidence from the Chinese. Now, before last year, before everything happened, I figured China would be a competitor. I figured China would be a major player on the world stage, but I would not have expected them to reach this level of ascendancy, and I don't think anyone really would have until they somehow managed to what looked like initially was going to hit them the hardest actually was one of the countries that at least manage better, or at least on paper manage better. Which, at this point, I think if just touch on this point, if China really was covering up some massive disease outbreak, still at this point, I'm not saying that they weren't initially. They probably were, but at this point, it would be pretty hard to hide, and especially with economic numbers. But point being is, compared to that summit, that is a massive PR victory for China. The Putin statement was a massive PR victory for the Russians. And really, with Nord Stream 2 coming down the pipe, no pun intended, and all these other pivotal trade deals and agreements that have upheld the American world order and ones that are working against the American world order, it's really has not been a good week for America's geopolitical standing at the end of the day. And the Biden tumble today just tops it off.
Yeah, quite a portent, one could argue. I think, the whole point of the Putin is a soulless killer. Like, dude, why are you trying to make him sound cool? Um, I think the whole point of that was to maybe give indication to the Chinese what kind of footing that the Americans were going to be on. But this summit was kind of a failure, the way that, the EU's Borrell, when he visited Russia during the whole Navalny scandal, was also a failure. Again, no agenda. Uh, is contentiously there. Russia was right to boot out a lot of the diplomats that were frankly egging on the protesters that weren't really there to just observe. So Burrell had no agenda. He failed spectacularly, and now you have Blinken. So, you know, basically two failures, and they, um, it, in a way, you could say that the situation is getting more dire. I think with us, we we've lots of people besides us have known where all of this was going to go to, so that if let's say relationships might have improved temporarily for a while. If things didn't drastically change, we knew we'd be here anyway. So in some ways, it all isn't a surprise. But for me, I think what's concerning is, in a sense, America is resigned that there is nothing it can do, and so it's tainting its diplomacy because it doesn't see an extricable way out of the situation, which really, like, in the long run, could mean that the situation escalates to such a degree it becomes violent, it becomes war. Um,
Yeah, you already had the, was it Washington Post? It ran a piece saying something. If America has to fight the Chinese communists in East Asia, we can be sure Irish Americans are there, and that was their St. Patrick's Day, especially talking about this. And it reeked of, I don't even want to say cope, but it just reeked of liberal decay, I suppose you could say.
why
Where,
would why would why would Irish Americans specifically want to fight against the CCP?
yeah, that was my question, and just it was a very ham-fisted article, and especially with the past week of military controversies centered around Tucker Carlson. I'm just saying we've gotten a 1, 2, 3 blow. So first you had the military controversy, then the Russia controversy, and then the China controversy, and I have to parrot this almost every episode. I think we're obligated to while Biden is in office. These are your adults in the room. This is your return to normal. This is this is America coming back. This is building back better. And you know what? This is I dare I say this is what we deserve as a civilization, but I won't go that far. That's not my place to say, but look, it's not surprising, honestly. I would have expected to be shocked and appalled by this, but honestly, it's rather mundane with it's no surprise. And of course, one last thing I want to mention about Biden is allegedly. Now, I don't know how much I buy into this, even though it was pretty weird. Uh, Allegedly, people are theorizing that not all of his public appearances are genuinely him. Some of them may be CGI recreations, such as his hand clipped through the microphone, which I'm not entirely sold on, but it was quite interesting watching that. But point being is, even if that is all nonsense, which it probably is, Biden has been an absentee president, and in his moments in the spotlight, we get stuff like this.
Right. And just to expand on the point I made earlier, just to give maybe two or three examples of how this could lead to, greater violence if America is resigned to conduct itself this way. Well, there's still the question of, let's say, North Korea. That was handled poorly as well by Blinken and company. But there's still the situation with Afghanistan. America has asked for cooperation in Afghanistan. Well, I guess America has resigned not to have cooperation in Afghanistan, and the number of troops will just increase. Whether it's the JPCOA, well, that's not going to happen, and America has resigned for that not to happen. And furthermore, escalation in Ukraine could potentially be the case because that rhetoric says, no, we're still in charge. America is back. And this is the way we're going to conduct ourselves. Well, the world has moved on.
And we are seeing de-escalation in Ukraine. There was some small-scale shelling. Now, fighting has not broken out, and definitely not to the level it has in 2014, 2015. But We are upon just a couple days after the 7th anniversary of Crimea being annexed by the Russian Federation, and there was just an aside. The Russian liberal opposition Navalny supporters were calling for Putin's arrest because he went to a celebration in Crimea that allegedly broke the government's COVID restrictions, or some nonsense like that. So I guess the phenomenon of the sort of liberalism we're seeing in the United States, this should go without saying, but truly is a worldwide thing. You're seeing this everywhere across every continent, even in places like Russia. I don't imagine I places that are more oppressive like China and Iran, but I mean, even Iran, you get some of that stuff, and it'll be really interesting if you see any of this liberal rhetoric come out of China, because that I think that'll show how truly far this extends. Because I mean, we all know it's there, but it's just that nobody speaks out against it. But it just goes to make the West look as absurd as ever. And with Ukraine in particular, again, you had starting out Biden and Zelensky teaming up to fight corruption, cracking down on oligarchs, allegedly both in Ukraine and in the United States and the Western world. And really, we discussed this last week. The Donbass is too valuable to Russia to let fall, and worst comes to worst, you will see arms shipment, you will see Russian military volunteers, you will see more of what has already been happening for the past 7 years. And I don't think the Ukrainians, honestly, I don't think the Ukrainian regime has the wherewithal to prosecute this offensive, prosecute this war to any degree. Because it's not vastly unpopular in Ukraine, but it's unpopular enough to the point where you do have to consider Russia and Ukraine were ruled by the same entity, whether that be the Russian Empire, Soviet Union, for the past several centuries. So there are quite literally a lot of blood ties. You have people with cousins, you have people with families on both sides of it. Now, I'm not saying it'd be total war, but and there's also is the sense, despite a lot of the new Ukrainian nationalist rhetoric since the fall of the Soviet Union, even a little bit before, there still is a sense that they are brotherly peoples, if not the same people. So and the final point I will make is also a point I made last week. The people in the Donbass have dug in. They're there to stay because everyone who does not have the stomach for a fight to the death for the Donbass has either left and went to Russia, went to other parts of Ukraine, or went westward. So again, it's just a matter. I think it's a matter of time before this breaks out. I don't think it would break out to the same level we saw at the beginning of the conflict in the Donbass or the crisis in Ukraine as a whole, but I do think we're on the precipice of something bigger than we've seen in the past few years. Maybe like to 2016 levels, around there, like just in the lead up to the U.S. elections when the Ukrainians thought they had their winning their sales because Trump was going to lose and Hillary was going to stand up to Russia. So yeah, I think we might get to that point, but time will tell, as it does with all things.
Yeah, I mean, you hear a lot of rhetoric, even by certain reporters, claim that, well, Russia is just a hydrocarbon economy and will
A
have
gas station with
outlived.
nukes, as John McCain put it.
Yeah, I just heard one recently on France 24, and that in 10, 20 years, nobody's even going to be using fossil fuels anymore. Well, I mean, if that's the case, then why not wait it out?
Hey, if you allow me to,
Obviously, you.
if you allow me to make another terrible pun, that's a pipe dream.
Right. So why get upset about Nord Stream 2? I mean, Russia's goose has already been cooked, and you could argue that you know the 2000s are going to be like the 80s, and it will all collapse anyways. Okay, well, if that's the case, then why the urgency? There's aren't you a few decades ahead, or is this really about preparation? Are you afraid that if that doesn't happen soon enough, then China's rise will be imminent, and then you won't be like? I mean, there's a lot of questions, but
And if
you know,
Russia's so desperate, why are they not trying to extract concessions? And even this goes back, I would say, to like post 9/11 when the neoconservatives, or even okay, maybe in the 1990s when the neocons, the Bushite people, the Clintonites were saying, "Oh, Russia, they're declining. They're not going to be relevant in however many years." And of course, you had in Yeltsin and a Western puppet, an American puppet, Bill Clinton, helped him specifically get elected. You even had a more pro-Western attitude in the early days of Putin, again, especially after 9/11. But you figured they would have been taking that time to extract concessions from Russia and not push further and further on their doorstep, whether that be Ukraine or Georgia or whatever, and either A, come to them with conciliatory rhetoric, which Russia was expecting, Russia was looking forward to, or B, start saying, hey, we can help you out of this dire crisis you're supposedly in if you just cooperate with us, if you help us keep China in check, if you help us keep the Middle East in check. But I would say that going far back, despite the hubris of the neocons, I'm sure there's plenty who believe that Russia is a declining power and a dying force in the world, despite also maintaining that it's this dangerous number one threat in the world. But I believe there's plenty who did see the collapse of the Soviet Union, did see the rise of Putin, and realized Russia is far from down from the count, and we may have to plan accordingly because maybe not now, but at some point Russia may be a force to be reckoned with. And I think we've reached that point. And I think in a strange way, those neoconservatives have been vindicated, yet through their own actions, sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy sort of deal. But again, the point being is, obviously Russia is not this paper tiger, it's not this weak country that they have been telling us it is, or else, like, A, they would have pushed to collapse it, B, reconciled, or C, at least extracted some concessions.
Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, yeah. On the that's I mean they haven't even thought through like okay, so what would happen to the American petrodollar? It's amazing all the focus that's placed on Russia, but no focus is based on the big elephant in the room, which is well, I mean, if hydrocarbons are not a big deal and they're on the way out, well, I guess that doesn't matter how that will affect the American dollar because the American dollar is based on the sales of oil. Anyways, it's just a lot of baloney, and it's funny to listen to. I mean, it's meant for a certain kind of audience.
Yeah,
And
for the CNN viewer, so to speak.
yeah, it's meant for middle class normies that are completely invested into the system.
So, turning back to some domestic news, Ghislaine Maxwell, the former mistress of one Jeffrey Epstein, the prolific sexual predator, ran the island of sexual abuse, Little St. James Island, and definitely did not have ties to any intelligence agencies or any elites. That was all just conspiracy theory, except the people we don't like. See, he definitely had association with Donald Trump, but not the CIA, not the Mossad. No, none of that. Okay, let's just dispel that notion out. And who definitely took his own life and was not taken out by anyone else. Well, his mistress, Ghislaine Maxwell, mistress and partner in crime, I should say. The details of her case have been considered too scandalous and too revealing and impure to be revealed to the American public. Now, again, turn on your TV, turn on just anything, or go on the internet and look at the depravity you see on a daily basis, the sort of things that you see. I mean, even Fox News will play the clips of whatever pop culture icon has made a fool out of themselves and has acted again in a disgusting manner, frankly. But look, the American public, they can tolerate all of that. They can tolerate the LGBTQ CIA parades. They can tolerate the drag queen story hours with the first graders. But the details of the case of one of the most prolific sex trafficking rings, that the American public just cannot stomach.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, yeah, interesting.
they've been radio silent on Maxwell. For a while there, I thought while they have this sort of window with other distractions, she might suffer an unfortunate fate similar to her former lover. And maybe it wouldn't be her tragic taking her own life, but maybe it would just be an accident or some sort of illness. Yeah, you figured that the certain virus spreading around right now may have claimed another victim, but no, it did not. But with that being said, we got some Middle Eastern news. Now, Syria, it has been, as Southfront put it, the most volatile game of whack-a-mole in the world. And that, of course, refers to Idlib in northwestern Syria, with the rooting out of the different rebel groups there, with Syrian offensives into Idlib and airstrikes on various targets by the Russians and by the Syrian Air Force. But again, I think South Front got this perfect when they said volatile game of whack-a-mole, where you clear out one group, you clear out one stronghold, more pop up, and you have to go hit that one. And it's really just, it seems at this point to be an endless challenge, and an endless challenge that can escalate and spiral out of control very quickly, as you had Israeli strikes in Syria, which many suspect to be in retaliation for the Syrian sabotage of the oil trade going out of northeastern Syria. Now, this has been happening for years. ISIS, especially, and other quote unquote moderate rebels had been smuggling oil into Turkey and providing Turkey with an energy source. And even this is more so in the case of Iraq, especially the early Iraq War. But again, I'm sure Israel had some hand in that with their dealings in the region. But there were Israeli strikes, and some suspect to be retaliation for that, and again, others suspect just their routine strikes. But it does look like Russia and Syria did put a pretty heavy hammer down on the oil fields, on the oil smuggling, which again is not a surprise. I think they're more brazen about it. I think they're trying to point out more and more of Russian aggression or Syrian aggression by them bombing the ICE oil fields. Again, the South Front video on that, it took a very interesting tone, and they really played up the angle that just these poor democratic freedom fighters are trying to sell oil to a foreign state and deprive the Syrian government of the revenue and deprive the Syrian people of the revenue. And look, they're good boys. They did not do a thing, and it's gonna be all fine if we just take out that evil monster Assad because he is just terrible. But that's of course the rhetoric they've been pushing on Syria for the past 10 years. Yeah, past 10 years. In fact, I believe it was a week ago.
This week.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
week was the 10th anniversary of the so-called uprising in Syria and the cradle of the revolution in Daraa, which had been crushed as far back as summer of 2018. But I mean, they pushed this when Biden had his pinpoint strikes on Syria against the Iranian groups, but they're really going to, especially when July comes, July, August, because that's when the fighting really broke out. Because before then, it was civil unrest, it was protests, there was exchange of gunfire and skirmishes, but the war proper didn't really break out until July when you had mass defections from the army, when you had all these rebel groups rise up. So out of Syria, the media is going to probably put out the sob stories about the revolution that was so promising was crushed by the totalitarian forces of Putin and Assad, and that's thanks to American inaction. That's thanks to Obama's inaction. That's thanks to Trump's inaction. And we need to be tougher on Biden so he can go in and stand up to these evil tyrants who are oppressing these people who just want to be a Jeffersonian democracy in the heart of the Levant.
Yeah. And even despite America's targeted attacks on Iranian forces this week in eastern Homs were testing out at a T4 air base their new drones. And I find that story interesting because so far we haven't had the kind of drone warfare that we saw in Nagorno-Karabakh. It has never taken place in Syria and still hasn't now, the better part of a year over that war. Um, there's been a few other things. So the Russians have apparently jammed some of the British GPS signals over Cyprus. There was a Russian sub that NATO was tracking that NATO has lost, and they're worried about, how did we lose it? So the tensions are increasing there, and it may be these sorts of things um, that gives a certain amount of the fosters a certain amount of respect even from the Americans uh, for for their adversaries. Um, I mean, as I've said before, I think the U.S. is they don't have a solution right now, so they will have to, I think, wait for an opportunity till an opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, whether that be to call it quits, at least under the table, and maybe keep a residual force there to act like they're doing something, occasional strikes, or to go in, find some opportunity to question the legitimacy of Assad's government and either cripple him or overthrow him, which has been, again, the approach for the last 10 years. But especially with the recent controversies, there isn't really any way I can see America getting itself involved in Syria. With the massive embarrassment the military establishment had last week, with us trying to simultaneously be tough on both China and Russia, which, looking at the current state of affairs, trying to take on both at once, you saw this mistake played out somewhat with Donald Trump, where one had to give over the other. You had to focus on one or the other for the be aggressive on. You didn't even necessarily have to be friendly with one, but you had to put them on the back burner. You had to maybe make some concessions here and there, or turn a blind eye to what they're doing. Which I do think Trump turned a blind eye a bit to what Russia is doing. I think that's why the map of Syria looks like it does today, and why Ukraine is as volatile as it is today. But really, whoever's in office, whether that be Biden, whether that be Kamala, whether that be somebody elected after one of them, they're facing a real uphill battle with this Middle Eastern situation. Really, again, from the perspective of the American empire, it's a lose lose, because you can do an intervention which is almost certain to fail and probably worse than Iraq in terms of instability and destabilization, or you can crawl away with your tail in between your legs and look, again, even weaker to your allies when you do. And I keep going back to this because it's so symbolic of the state of America right now. Biden tripping. You could have one of those moments in Syria where people in Europe look at it, the Japanese, the Filipinos, our Asian allies, or allies all across the world, look at this and realize, why are we still hitching our wagons to this clearly decaying empire? And the only countries that will really stick around to it are countries like Turkey, countries like Germany, countries like Poland, Japan, Korea, that either rely on American security guarantees or feel that they can extract something through their relation with the United States. And we're even seeing, again, Turkey calling, as I mentioned earlier, Biden's comments unacceptable and unbecoming of an American president.
Mhm.
We're seeing this all play out, and I think, ironically enough, this is the point that a lot of the non-interventionists have made since the 90s, even before. America, through its aggressive foreign policy, has done more to isolate itself more than the so-called isolationists of our pre-World War One history ever had.
Yeah, and that may be the case that America's lack of a game plan and a strategy of waiting for certain potentialities to develop themselves is also wearing everyone else down. Um, uh, I would say that from the time of the conflict in Georgia till now, there's been a kind of reevaluation of what America maybe can and can't do. It has never fought an adversary um, that's even had an air force in the last 20 years.
I
So
think Vietnam is the last time we had any significant skirmishes or dogfights in the sky, because the Iraqi Air Force we pretty much disabled both times before we went in there. Afghanistan was no contest in that regard, and all these various Middle Eastern interventions, whether it be Syria, Libya, etc. Sure, they had some air defenses, but a proper air force that would actually put up a challenge, actually dogfight, etc. We haven't gone up against in any massive scale since Vietnam and arguably World War II. And compare the different kinds of aircrafts we've had since then. I mean, World War II, we didn't have jet engines. Vietnam, we had the earliest jet fighter craft. But nobody has had a real dogfight, and we haven't really seen a real wide-scale dogfights in F-16s or F-35s or F-22s. These have been primarily bombing targets on the ground or engaging, uh, again, anything or reconnaissance. But point being is, yeah, I can't think of, yeah, I think Vietnam is quite literally the last time. It seems like there should have been something sooner, but nothing comes to my mind. And I don't know what the American evaluation on terms of dogfights are, or fighter to fighter combat, and how even intensive the training is for that nowadays. I imagine, especially with the dawn of the quote unquote war on terror, a lot of the pilot training was moved away from that because of adversary versus adversary conflicts. But just in terms of the war games we see frequently with Russia and China, we lose those. The American side, the blue team, quote unquote, loses to the red team time and time again. Whether that be in a hypothetical Baltic scenario, whether that be in a hypothetical South China Sea scenario, whether that be in a hypothetical even Persian Gulf scenario. Time and time again, we lose, and really, I don't think. I think this goes without saying, but I don't think the American people have the stomach for that kind of conflict, even on a limited scale.
Yeah, yeah.
But with that being said, we have some interesting news out of Yemen. So, of course, the Houthi forces continue to strike at Saudi targets, both within the country, whether that be Saudi aligned forces within Yemen and in Saudi Arabia proper. However, they have had some missile malfunctions, nothing too drastic, but point being is they are yet again on the advance, and that has created some unlikely allies in that regard. Because now Turkey is offering aid to Saudi Arabia and offering to send the fighters it's deployed to theaters such as Syria, Azerbaijan, and Libya to go fight on behalf of the pro Saudi forces in Yemen. Which is very interesting because Saudi Arabia and Turkey do have a pretty adversarial relationship. It's not outright enemies, I wouldn't say that, but they are on poor terms with each other. And frankly, I figured that the Turks would have been on better terms with the Iranians based on previous actions throughout I don't know the past 3 4 years, and especially when there were almost weekly summits between Rouhani, Erdogan, and Putin. I don't know. Maybe this is the American state coming to them saying, "We can help your problems. We can help you with some of these economic issues. Whatever. If you just send your mercenaries, you send your proxy fighters to go support our war effort in Yemen because we just do not have the means currently to fight in Yemen." So maybe, and again, that is all the more interesting with Erdogan taking Putin's side in this most recent dispute, where you're really seeing Turkey play both sides again. They're playing the entire theater, and it seems like aside from Syria, these deployments of fighters are usually pretty short-lived because, of course, you had Syria, then they moved to Libya, then they were pulled out to go to the Caucasus, then back to Syria, and now it looks like they're going to Yemen. So it's no surprise these people again are quite literally mercenaries. They're fighting for a paycheck, really, and they'll go wherever they're sent. A lot of them have no prospects at home or have a family that relies on this income, and it's handsome pay. Don't get me wrong. And these are experienced and hardened fighters that came from theaters like Syria, which has been at war, as we've said, for the past 10 years now. And I still have not exactly figured out what I think the motivation behind this exact move would be. The only reasonable thing I can think of is that the American State Department, or the deep state, or whatever you want to call them, went to Turkey and said, and again, tried to cut them a deal so long as they got deeper involved in Yemen on the Saudi side.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good guess. Um, and it is also interesting, as you pointed out, that Turkey hasn't had more cooperation with Iran, but maybe one of the reasons for that is, in Turkey's eyes, Iran is on the wrong side. Um, Not that Turkey isn't more committed to dealing with the Kurds than they are with Assad. I think that's the case. Uh, they will take whatever free oil they can get, because it costs them nearly nothing and the benefits are so high. And of course, Israel also from time to time buys this oil uh, from Turkey. So, I imagine that they feel that Iran is on the wrong side and they maybe can't make concessions. So, yeah, so it's funny. Erdogan's boys are now going to Yemen. That is interesting. It is something I didn't foresee happening.
No, this would have been one of the last things I would have predicted in terms of I wouldn't even call that necessarily an outrageous prediction, but it did come out of nowhere. It came out of left field. I was not expecting this one, and I don't expect this stint to last long based on what other theaters we saw. I don't know, maybe with their wonderful performance in the Caucasus, which we'll get into a minute, maybe they will turn the tides of the war in Yemen against the Houthis and crush them once for all, as Saudi Arabia has been unable to do. And really, I do think that Saudi Arabia definitely has the means on paper to crush this Houthi insurgency. Maybe it's the Turkish military advisors they need. Maybe, yet again, as history tells us, the Arabs just need proper discipline and guidance from an outside leader, whether that be a Turk, whether that be a Persian, whether that be a European, to fight effectively. And I won't go that far, but we could see a turning of the tide if, well, we know Turkey's sending fighters, but I imagine they're probably sending military advisors and people that will direct the Saudis on how to use these fighters. And I really don't know how long this could last with such poor relations between Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Will this be some sort of watershed moment where they shed past grievances and come together? I mean, Saudi Arabia was quite literally created to be a rival to the Turks. That was the history of these Arab Gulf kingdoms, to be the hub of Sunni Islam with the holy city of Mecca, to dethrone that position from the Ottoman Sultan and the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish forces and the other Sunni Muslims that fight under them. So it is interesting to watch the cooperation between the two when the one was created and arguably still is used to this day to be an offset to Turkey. And I don't know, maybe the religious conflict will come up again. Maybe the idea of who is the true face of Sunni Islam will come up again. Or maybe they both have such a fear of Iranian aggression. Maybe this is a religious issue where they feel the need to unite over this issue and at least counter, maybe not overthrow the Iranian government. Maybe Turkey is interested in that, but drive Iranian influence out of the Gulf. And as you said, it also could very well be an oil issue in terms of they don't want the Iranians to, again, expand their market. I'm sure they'd be happy to buy for them, but maybe Saudi Arabia cut them a better deal. And as we were saying, it looks like their oil trade with the democratic forces and the moderate rebels in Syria had been sabotaged. So maybe Saudi Arabia cut them a really good oil deal this time around, which I would say is probably the most likely scenario in all of this. Not saying that the other ones didn't happen, but this seems like it would probably be the one at the forefront if any of these happen to be true.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we'll see. I find it also kind of, you know, you know, during the time of the election to it, and shortly after, there was all this speculation that Biden, these were voices critical from the left who were expecting that Biden was now going to reverse course on funding Saudi Arabia and the war in Yemen, and I never once thought that that would happen.
Oh no, it's much too
You know,
vital.
the fun, it's funny to me because um, it's 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 the elections themselves that are kind of like a religious ceremony for for liberal democracies, for their wokeism. Like, um, and for that time, people begin to believe again that it's possible. They certainly at that time also believe that um, there isn't a better system, no matter how flawed this one is. So, uh, anyways, the gullibility during those times is it's really something to watch.
Yeah, I would say, there is more political fanaticism among the diehard supporters of democracy in the West, particularly in the United States, than there is among these radical dictatorships, both contemporarily and throughout history, whether that be the Germans or the Italians under Mussolini or the Soviet Union or North Korea. Now, again, the propaganda level put out in those countries was very high. The demanding of conformity was very high, but I think a lot of people don't realize it because they have been more or less they've been more or less tricked into thinking they're doing this of their own volition, they're doing this of their own will. Whether you are a Democrat who's a hardcore Biden supporter and thinks America is back, or whether you are a person who supported Trump and is all MAGA and thinks that Trump is going to make America great again and it's going to be just like the Reagan era or whatever, back when whatever their idealized time of America being great was. But point being is, I do think you're right that especially in the era of secularism, it has taken on a it has taken on a religious format regardless of that. And again, these elections are ceremonies. They think that they believe in these high ideals that will likely never come true, whether that be again on the Republican or the Democratic side, or even if somebody's like a throwaway third party voter, like these libertarians who think that if we just get a libertarian candidate into office, we'll be in Capistan, guys. Trust me. But yeah, you do bring up a good point with that. But yeah, really, the idea that Biden was ever going to cut off Saudi Arabia was foolish. And any talk of the Khashoggi thing, again, I think was to put pressure on Saudi Arabia because of its more or less, it's more or less how you'd put it, warmer relations with the Chinese and the Russians. And again, I am personally speculating the spring will bring us a brief oil war. I don't think it'll be that long, but I think it will be a brief oil war between the Russians and the Saudis that causes. I don't think the price will drop in the negatives again, but I think the price will drop just a little bit. But point being is, I think to bring this all together, Biden and the Biden administration, the State Department, Blinken, all these people said all this stuff about Saudi Arabia because they said, you better watch your ties to the Chinese. We see that you've been selling oil in yuan for the past, 6, 7 years now. You better watch it because you know our boys at the CIA, as incompetent as they may look, they've been planning a coup in your country for years, and these bored desk jockeys would love nothing more than to overthrow a regime, which is something they haven't gotten to do since the Syrian revolution failed 10 years ago. And honestly, I do think the CIA and the military industrial complex, I think these people are itching for action because Trump was a downer with that. Even Obama was a downer with that. The neoconservatives, when they complain about Obama's inaction leaving behind, they have a bit of a point. Now, ultimately, Obama had a different way of accomplishing their goals. Trump was just a schizophrenic foreign policy, for better and for worse, mind you. But Biden, they thought they had their ace in the hole. And any other time, yes, they would have. But it is 2021. It is in the wake of an economic crisis and something of a global pandemic. I won't deny that it happened entirely. I don't think it was as hyped up as we all thought it was going to be, but it definitely did a number on a lot of medical infrastructure in a lot of countries. You think Italy and even the United States for that matter. But point being is they thought they had their ace in the hole in Biden, and they did not.
Right. And now we're seeing an administration that is, in many ways, even sillier. Um, say what one will, but Trump was actually consistent about China throughout his entire adult career, long before he became president or announced that he was going to run for the presidency. Um, y- you know, uh,
Hey, you may know this. I think this would be relevant if you have this information. Do you know if Biden has any long-standing ties to Brzezinski or like met with him even back when he was just a senator or congressman? Because it seems like their strain of thought when it comes to foreign policy is, I wouldn't say nearly identical, but it's very similar. I think Biden was very influenced by Brzezinski and his ilk.
right, right. Yeah, I think it's more of a reliance on soft power because I think we've come to the limit of hard power. But that said, um, however inadequate Trump's approach was, he did have one with regards to China. Biden doesn't. Uh, but there's still the same level of mixed messaging. For instance, he says, well, China has is a different culture. There are cultural differences. We can't talk about the Uyghurs the same way. And at the same time, Blinken shows up and is complaining about a genocide in China of the Uyghurs.
Yeah, and
So there's a lot more similarities than there are differences in
is that
terms
not
of,
just the mirror image of Trump and Pompeo talking about Russia?
yes, yeah.
Yeah, it is, and really, I will leave you this last question before we move on to the Armenia Azerbaijan stuff. Who do you think is ultimately going to be uh, a worse, at least from our point of view, but more peak American empire? Blinken or Pompeo? I would say Blinken. I think Pompeo had a time and a place that made sense from the Trump perspective, even if you are willing to make those concessions. And I'm fully willing to admit Trump was not perfect. He was a disappointment in many ways. But I do think Pompeo served some purpose. I think it was a net negative. But I still think Blinken is going to be that peak America, what 21st century American empire will look like. I think he will be the face of that. I think Pompeo, to a lesser degree, I think he'll represent that, again, to use Moldbug's term, outer parties sort of view of it. But I think Blinken, more so than Biden, more so than Kamala, will be the face of the 21st century American empire.
Right. Yeah, it could be that when Kamala becomes president, um, and Blinken is the Secretary of Defense, that we're going to see more of this kind of peak empire. I also think it's funny that even the North Koreans are laughed at Blinken and company, and that kind of messaging by meeting with the Quad, uh, the Quad being India, Australia, Japan, and I forget the other one. I don't know if it was
India,
Taiwan or not.
Australia, yeah, I was it the Philippines possibly. I think it might have been the Philippines.
It might have been, but the Philippines,
Yeah,
they waver
Duterte
back.
has been he had again he's been playing the Erdogan game, but yeah
Yeah,
it's either Philippines or Taiwan, and I think Taiwan. Now that you say it, makes more sense.
yeah. So as if they don't see these machinations, like you know, the upper echelons of the political class in China and in Russia, and indeed in all countries, but particularly these two, they focus very, very sharply on the the machinations, what is said just prior to a summit, where who do they meet with first. They understand all the signaling that is happening, and they don't, they're not fooled by it, right? No matter how um, geared this is for an American audience. Now, of course, the strategy is you make the American audience the de facto audience of the world, right? In a way, America replaces the old world, literally, and that's an American strategy, right? That's why like so many uh, capitals around the world, even capitals that are more or less adversaries of Washington, have a kind of globalist cast amongst them. Uh, it was more distinctly American, I would say 10, 12, 15 years ago. Now it's more,
Well,
let's say, globalist.
I think one actually two stories that really back that up are two things that get often overlooked. In 2017, you may or may not recall, there was a real cleaning of the house within the Chinese Communist Party with Xi Jinping, and there was an attempt to actually remove him among a lot of the elite Communist Party members, and he had them. I don't think he imprisoned them or anything, but I think he had them removed from positions of political power and really clean house. I think he was cleaning out those chimerica elements, as some people would call them, in order to move China into a position where it's a more quote unquote independent world power. And the second case is Saudi Arabia, where you had Mohammed bin Salman outright just arresting people and having them put under house arrest, even detaining the prime minister of Lebanon for a brief period. And I do think that was a more overt cleaning of house where he was getting rid of a lot of the old guard and looking to realign himself to a position where Saudi Arabia could be more cooperative with places like Russia and China.
Hmm, hmm.
Yeah, but I do agree that I mean, and if you want to go back even further, Putin's cleansing of the oligarchs in the 90s and early 2000s was an example of that, where you have these people who are very in line with what the swamp believes, what the people in DC believe, and they're really just the mirror image of that, whether that be Russian, Chinese, Saudi, European, etc. And again, I think we've seen in those three examples in particular how countries begin to move away from that. And really, I think you got to keep your eye on places like Germany, places like Japan. Now, these places won't have the political repressions and arrests, but these people being forced to resign or put in positions of less power. I mean, for example, the person who was elected to be Merkel's successor in the Christian Democratic Party, had the Twitter argument with some neoconservative. It was some neoconservative journalist, some American diplomat, defending, more or less defending Assad and saying the war in Syria is more complicated than we have to remove this evil dictator. So, point being is you're seeing this cleaning of house all across the world, whether that be in overt ways such as Saudi Arabia or more covert ways such as Germany and China, which I expect other countries to follow suit soon enough. And yeah, so I think you're onto something there.
Yeah.
Now to close out, there is the raising of tensions in Nagorno-Karabakh, with both sides moving troops, doing drills, and it's mainly the Azeris who are accusing the Armenians of raising tensions, and the Azeris are doing a rally around the flag sort of act. Now, Aliyev was a very successful leader. Love him or hate him, whether you think Azerbaijan was in the right or wrong, which let me be clear. I think Azerbaijan was in the wrong. I think they were the aggressor of that conflict, and I think they were attacking historical Armenian populations. And I think Aliyev is personally a bad man, but I believe from an Azeri perspective, let me put it this way: if the Armenians had a leader like Aliyev, that would have been great. But they had Pashin and his cabal of Soros picked elites, so it turned out that way. But Aliyev, it looks like he is really drumming this up again. Now, whether that's because faltering in popular support or whether the Azeris feel that they need to put an end to this Armenian conflict once and for all and really solidify that they have won this conflict and Armenia will submit to their will and that they control this territory, etc. But there's been the beating of the drums on that side, and of course, that's led to the Armenians within their disorder. Of course, you had the military chief of staff and several other military officers call upon Pashinyan to step down. That didn't happen, of course. Of course, he accused them of coup and tried to have them fired. He had a few successfully fired, mind you. But with that, you're seeing a general dissatisfaction on both sides. You're seeing a lot of the Armenian pro-Western media try to pin this raised tensions on Russia's inadequate peace deal and how they didn't do enough and how they were sold out by the Russians and based Macron is going to come to our rescue. But point being is, you're seeing almost a repeat of the situation with the Azeris with their very competent, disciplined leadership. Love them or hate them, you have to admit they're good at what they do, and the chaos going on in Armenia, the absolute the madhouse, if you will, going in Armenia, where yeah, Pashin is the prime minister, but nobody respects him. I think his approval ratings is again, I think they're below 30 at this point, which when you start to get in dangerous territory in a so-called democracy. His military chiefs hate him. The Armenian populace tried to lynch him upon the first peace treaty. So I do have fears that violence is going to escalate here and that the Azeris will see more and more success unless the Russians in particular or some other power, but it's probably going to have to be the Russians, can either broker a deal or guarantee the security of Armenia or Armenians. Now, again, Russians have had peacekeepers in the region. That seemed to work thus far. But again, you can expect the Soros-aligned media, the Western-aligned media within Armenia to drum up against this and push back against this and say, I mean, they were blaming Pashinyan's blame for his incompetent leadership is, well, we tried to fight back, but the Russian weapons just didn't work. They just stopped working. Now, it is believable that with the outdated military technology, and again, that's also something you can blame on Pashinyan because in 2018, Russia offered to renew security agreements and update Armenian air defense, which that was a big thing with the Azeri Predator drones they got from Turkey and Israel. They offered to update Armenian air defenses like they did Syrian air defenses, and they refused. And again, Pashinyan has just decided to scapegoat Russia and for him and his Soros handlers' failures.
Yeah, I dare say Pashinyan is more unpopular than even Zelensky.
By far.
By far, by far. And Zelensky is not doing well. But yeah, it would be really bad if uh, Nagorno-Karabakh started to be at war again. Because in a way that would ultimately push Russia to act in a very sort of first person role. there could be subterfuge to do that because, in a sense, Pashinyan being so closely aligned with Soros and the American Inner Party and the EU. In a sense, that put him in. It made him a strange bedfellow with the Russians. But I think it was really a war they were willing to lose. And I don't know what would happen if they continued along that trajectory. Uh,
I don't know. Maybe the Armenian people would have found him and delivered mob justice, so to speak. I mean, they were serious about it too. They were storming the parliament and
oh yeah.
everything. And again, that's another example of parliament stormings that happened before the dark day of January 6th. But
Yeah.
I think as summer comes, as these trends continue, and especially if the economy of one of the other falters or some other political crisis does arise, we're going to see this peace agreement be very short lived. Again, a lot of Armenians are dissatisfied with this. The Azeris want to go further and solidify their victory. Turkey is celebrating its position as a new regional power and really enjoying more or less being able to dictate the politics of other neighboring countries again, other countries in the region again. Russia is going to have to hunker down again. Russia, they have to show that they're serious. They have, as they're reclaiming the position as a world power, as a force to be reckoned with, they have to honor their commitments, especially to a country so close to their border, and especially when, at least in the first case, you had a lot of rebels who fought in Syria being moved to a country on Russia's border and in the North Caucasus, no less, which just up until recently, up until I believe, I think they only declared the war over against the war on terrorism in the Northern Caucasus over in 2019. So, not that the fighting was as hot as it was in the 90s, early 2000s, but point being is, it still is a volatile situation there, and there's a very real possibility of spillover. I wouldn't say it's likely, but it could set off a chain reaction, and it's something that the Russian leadership has to consider, and I believe does consider a possibility.
Yeah. Uh, it's. I mean, I really hope that nothing happens there because a second time around, I think it's going to be more severe. Either it's going to be a total walk, and Armenia loses this region entirely, which will mean the same kind of violence, targeted ethnic violence against Armenians, or Russia says no, we're running this particular part of Nagorno-Karabakh, and we're not going to acquiesce. And you know, you can see how this would be preferable for the more cynical branches within Western and American elites.
Oh yeah, it just
Why
shows Russia trying to assert control over former imperial and Soviet territories. It's just that Moscow has not learned how to behave like a democracy since the fall of the Soviet Union. They're just as aggressive as ever, and this is why we need more support for NATO. This is why we need more funding for NATO. This is why Georgia needs to join. This is why Ukraine needs to join, and this is why we need more troops in the Baltics, etc. It would be again in terms of chess. Honestly, it would be the sacrifice of a pawn in terms of what benefit they would get from it.
yeah.
And yeah, like they're willing to sacrifice much more than a disputed region between Armenia and Azerbaijan to justify putting the liberal empire into overdrive, which they've been doing for the past, I don't know, I'd say since even before Trump came in office. I'd say Obama, since Bush's failure
Right.
of hard power. And yeah, it would be the perfect justification for them to do this, this, and this, and they would win over quite a few people, especially in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. So yeah, I think they're really banking on Russia having a firm response to this, which is why I think the time is now, and I think Putin is and Lavrov and all the Russian officials are well aware of the situation, are really trying to navigate the situation, walk on that tightrope, keep a balance between the two, to stop yet another global escalation. Not even just a regional escalation, but a global escalation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of like Biden's remarks about Putin being a soulless killer. These are just provocations, right? They've been trying to provoke Putin to make a misstep for over 20 years. And, it hasn't worked and it's not going to work.
Yeah, it's I see no I really see no way out of it in terms of conflict breaking out. I just hope that some comprehensive peace agreement can be reached before then. And even if conflict does break out, I hope some comprehensive agreement can be reached after the fact. And I don't know. The Azeris and the Soros cabal that controls Armenia have to be well aware of the political situation in America and know when to instigate this conflict. Because I believe that the Soros cabal, a lot of these people who run Armenia, similar to Georgia, similar to Saakashvili fleeing to Ukraine, a lot of them, they can do what their Western masters told them in Armenia and go flee and run for president in another former Soviet republic like Saakashvili did. So we could see that. And again, Georgia has had its own misgivings and own crises, as we were discussing an episode or two ago. So again, the Caucasus, I would not have expected to be as much a hot spot as they are, but lo and behold, here we are, and this has been yet another week of the War Report, now hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, a very interesting episode. I thought this episode was going to be a little bit shorter, but I hope you guys all enjoy. Just keep an eye out for any content I might post, whether I make a standalone video or whether I make another an announcement of where I'm going to put the stuff. So I'm still trying to figure out where exactly I want to back the stuff up. Of course, I have the BitChute channel, which is under construction, so to speak. I'm trying to really set it up for a proper archive for this show. I'm looking for the old recordings and everything. But point being is, when I get all that set up eventually, when I get everything put together, I will make an announcement video or make an announcement on the show and let you guys know where you can find all of our content on other platforms. Because again, we've been able to fly under the radar on YouTube so far, and we're very appreciative and loving of our audience here. But this could be taken away in the blink of an eye. So just keep an eye out for that. I hope you enjoyed this episode. See you guys next time, and goodbye.
Take care.